The Rhino charged straight at the guard. The crowd screamed, but he didn't even blink. The impact was unimaginable. But what happened next, no one could have expected. London was alive with its usual rhythm. Tourists roamed the streets, soaking in the sounds of the city, capturing videos, taking photos of every landmark, as if the city might disappear tomorrow. And standing tall against the city's noise, magnificent as ever, Buckingham Palace, a symbol of tradition, of history, of unshakable power. And in front of the palace, they stood. The royal guards, scarlet uniforms, towering bearskin hats, posture so perfect it seemed unnatural. They didn't blink, they didn't flinch, they didn't move. They weren't just men, they were symbols. At least, that's what the tourists believed. That day, the crowd was particularly restless. People pressed against the gates, snapping photos, filming videos, testing the guards, trying to break them. I bet $20 that guy won't even twitch. A guy in expensive sunglasses nudged his friend. What if they're not even real? This is London. Maybe they're robots. A girl giggled, striking a pose for a selfie. Seriously? I thought they'd at least react a little. A woman in an elegant dress pursed her lips, unimpressed. And they kept going, snapping their fingers in the guards' faces, waving their hands. Someone even jokingly bumped into one of them with a shoulder. But they didn't move. Flawless, unshakable, carved from stone. And that was what frustrated the tourists the most. The guards were a symbol of power that could not be broken. And then, something happened. Something no one expected. At first, it was just a distant movement, a shadow, a low, heavy thud, swallowed by the noise of the crowd. No one paid attention until the first scream. "Is that a rhino?" One person turned, then another, and then the entire crowd. They saw it. A massive gray beast barreling toward the square. A rhino. A real one. A 5-ton tank, charging at 40 km/h. And its target was clear. The Royal Guard. The same guard they had been mocking just minutes ago. The same guard who had not moved an inch. Panic erupted. "Oh my God! Did it escape from a zoo? How the hell is there a rhino in the middle of London? The guard's not moving. Does he not see it?" People scattered. Some fell. Some screamed. Some just stood frozen in shock. But the guard didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't change his expression. He saw the rhino. He couldn't not see it. And yet, he stood firm. And at that moment, it became clear. This day would go down in history. Panic ignited in an instant, like a match striking dry grass. In one moment, the lively crowd of tourists turned into a chaotic mass of bodies sprinting in every direction. Screams mixed with the thunder of rushing footsteps, the clatter of dropped cameras, and the crash of overturned souvenir stands. A woman holding an ice cream cone froze in place, then let out a strangled scream, stumbling backward, the cone slipping from her fingers and splattering onto the pavement. A child sitting on his father's shoulders let out a terrified wail, gripping his father's head in fear. As the man bolted, not even looking where he was going, a young man who had just laughed at how still the guards were, tripped over the curb, crashed onto his side, and crawled away in panic, too shaken to even try standing. People grabbed their children, abandoned their bags, and sprinted toward open storefronts, knocking each other over in their rush to escape. A man with an expensive camera tried to run, but slammed into a woman carrying shopping bags. They both collapsed, their belongings scattering across the pavement. Souvenirs, tickets, maps of London, all trampled underfoot by the stampede. And the rhino kept charging. It was monstrous, a 5-ton beast, its skin like armor, every step fueled by unstoppable force. Its flaring nostrils, its massive lowered head, its razor-sharp horn gleaming in the sunlight, deadly enough to impale anything in its way. Its hooves pounded against the pavement, the impact leaving tiny cracks in the stone. Its ragged, heavy breath rumbled like a war cry, and its target was standing right in front of it. The royal guard, tall, imposing, his scarlet uniform pristine, gold buttons gleaming, the towering bearskin hat making him seem even taller. His face was hidden in shadow beneath the heavy headpiece. He stood rigid, motionless, as if he didn't even see the enormous, enraged animal barreling straight at him. But he saw it. He had to. The crowd screamed, shrieked, waved their arms frantically, pointing at the charging rhino. Some people tried breaking through the barricades, waving their phones, shouting for someone to do something. "Oh my God! Somebody stop it!" A man clutched his head in terror. "It's gonna kill him!" "He's not moving. Is he insane?" But the guard didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't change his expression. And in that moment, the crowd's fear turned into disbelief. People began slowing down, turning their heads back, unable to process what they were witnessing. They expected him to react, to take a step back, to dodge, to lift a hand, something, but nothing. He just stood there, as if there was no danger, as if the rhino didn't even exist. One more second, and then, impact. The collision was thunderous, not just a crash, but an explosion of force, like a train smashing into a steel pillar, like the Tower of London itself had challenged a raging storm. The air shook, the crowd gasped, someone screamed, someone covered their eyes. Others threw their hands over their faces, as if the impact might somehow reach them too. Some couldn't bear to watch and slammed their eyes shut. They expected him to be sent flying, to be torn off his feet, to crash to the ground, to lose consciousness, maybe even... But he was still there. He hadn't fallen. He had leaned back slightly, his balance momentarily shaken. But he was still standing. The crowd stared, breathless, disbelieving. This was impossible, unthinkable. And this was only the beginning. A thunderous impact shook the square. This wasn't the sound of the crowd screaming, nor the rumble of traffic, nor the crash of thunder. This was a collision of forces. Like a train slamming into a concrete wall, like a lightning bolt striking solid stone. The shockwave rippled through the square, rattling every wall, every cobblestone, every cell in the bodies of those frozen in place. This wasn't just an impact. This was a moment that split reality in half. The guard was sent flying. The crowd watched in horror as his body lifted into the air, like a toppled chess piece. His feet left the ground, his arms flung outward. His rifle slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the pavement with a sharp metallic ring. He crashed onto his back with a dull, resounding thud. His scarlet uniform burned against the gray stone. His iconic bearskin hat had shifted slightly, revealing part of his forehead. And in that instant, everything stopped. Not a single sound left the lips of the onlookers. No whispers, no shouts, no breath. Only the rhino. It froze too. Its massive body suddenly halted, as if the very laws of nature had forced it still. It expected a different outcome. It was used to things breaking. It was used to things collapsing, shattering, crumbling under its weight. But the man before it didn't break. The beast snorted, flaring its massive nostrils, and took a few steps back. It lowered its head, its curved horn scraping the ground, as if trying to process what had just happened. Its small, dark eyes studied the fallen body. Time stretched, like the universe itself had paused. The crowd waited for soldiers to rush in, waited for medics, for police, for sirens to pierce the air, waited for someone to do something, but no one moved. And then, the impossible happened. The guard stirred. At first, just a flicker in his fingers, as if checking if they were still there. Then, a hand pressed against the pavement. Then, he lifted his head, and then, slowly, calmly, as if he had simply decided to get up after a short rest, he sat up. The crowd gasped. "No. No," someone whispered. "That's impossible." Phones snapped up. Fingers mashed record buttons. People forgot how to breathe. He wasn't supposed to get up. This wasn't human. This was impossible. But he did. He planted one knee onto the cobblestone. Then he rose, steady, unshaken, like he hadn't just been struck by a 5-ton beast. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some were still frozen, their mouths slightly open in mute shock. Someone let out a nervous chuckle, but it quickly died in the weight of the moment. How did he survive that? The Rhino hit him at full speed and he just stood up. The guard didn't look at the Rhino. He didn't look at the crowd. He simply brushed the dust from his uniform, like a man dusting off an autumn leaf. He adjusted his sleeves, smoothing out the creases, as if checking his appearance before duty. Then, he calmly bent down, picked up his rifle, gripped it firmly by the stock, and stepped back into formation, standing at attention, as if nothing had happened. The crowd stared at him like a ghost. A moment stretched into forever. This day would be remembered, but it wasn't over yet. But the Rhino didn't leave. The crowd was still in shock. They had just witnessed the impossible. The guard hadn't just endured the impact. He had stood back up, as if it was nothing. Everyone assumed this was the end, that the Rhino, realizing its attack had failed, would simply turn away and run, leaving behind chaos, leaving behind fear. But it didn't. It watched. It didn't understand. Because to the Rhino, this was just as impossible. It was a force of nature, a destructive machine. It was used to its path being clear, used to things running, people, animals, even the bravest of creatures. They all either fled or broke. But this man didn't move. The Rhino blinked. Its small black eyes studied the figure before it. It shook its head, almost as if trying to rid itself of a strange sensation. Something was wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This man should be gone. This man should have run, like everyone else. But he stayed. The Rhino snorted, its massive lungs filled, its thick armored skin rippled. It took a sharp, deliberate step forward, muscles tensed, hooves shifted. It was preparing to charge again. The crowd screamed, "No, no, no! Oh my God, not again! He's going to get killed!" But the guard didn't move. The crowd couldn't believe it. They had already seen the first impact, seen him thrown to the ground, seen him rise from the impossible. And now, with the Rhino charging again, they could only think of one thing. He just doesn't understand what's happening. But he did. He saw the beast charging again. He heard the thunderous tremors of its hooves. He felt the vibration of the air as the beast barreled forward. He knew what was coming. And yet, he didn't retreat. He didn't lift his hands. He didn't take a single step back. He just stood. And then, something strange happened. The Rhino stopped, just inches away. It froze. Its massive body halted mid-charge. The crowd held their breath. It could have crushed him. It could have impaled him, but it didn't. It just stared. At the one human who hadn't run, the one human who hadn't flinched, the one human who was, in its own way, bigger than even itself. And then, the rhino sat down. The square fell silent, and in that moment, everyone knew. This day would become legend. The crowd held its breath. Everything that had happened so far had already defied reality. But now, this was something else entirely. The rhino didn't attack. It didn't snarl. It didn't paw at the ground. It didn't let out a threatening roar. It did nothing to signal aggression. Instead, it sat down, right in front of the guard. It was so unbelievable that people didn't trust their own eyes. This beast, a creature that had destroyed everything in its path, an unstoppable force of nature, a living battering ram that knew no obstacles, had torn down fences, crashed through gates, and charged forward with no regard for what lay ahead. And now it just sat there, as if it no longer saw the guard as an enemy, as if it had realized something. The crowd didn't understand. A deep, unnatural silence filled the air. No talking, no whispers, no gasps. Only the faint sound of hundreds of people breathing, too afraid to disturb the fragile balance of the moment. The guard didn't move. He stood exactly as he had before, with the same flawless posture, with the same expression of absolute calm, as if the beast before him didn't exist, as if none of this mattered. It was a silent, motionless standoff, man and beast staring at one another. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some still expected the rhino to attack again, that this was just a brief pause before another charge. But it didn't move. The crowd wasn't screaming anymore. They weren't even scared. They were just stunned. They were waiting for an answer. And then, from beyond the horizon, sirens pierced the silence. Blue flashing lights cut through the distant streets. The sound grew louder, rhythmic, pulsing through the air like a long overdue alarm. Police, zoologists, men and women in green vests, armed with tranquilizer darts, nets, and equipment for handling dangerous, uncontrollable animals. Experts trained to intervene. But now, nothing was under control. The crowd began to murmur. They're going to put it down. Are they capturing it? The guard isn't even moving. Why is nobody doing anything? But the most unbelievable part? No one dared step forward. Everyone could see it. The rhino was just sitting there. How do you explain a creature that, just minutes ago, was a force of destruction was now silent and still before a single man? How do you explain why an animal, built for power, built for rage, built to conquer, chose to stop? The police hesitated. The zoologists didn't give orders. No one took action. They just stood, watching. The crowd waited. But now they weren't waiting for violence. They were waiting for a miracle. Buckingham Palace was shut down. After what had unfolded in front of hundreds of tourists, the area was sealed off. Witnesses were escorted away. Barricades were set up. No official statements were given. But the story had already escaped. The world already knew. The footage spread like wildfire. It started on social media. Short, grainy clips from bystanders flooded the internet. Some posted the moment of impact. Some posted the moment the guard rose. But the most viral clip? The one that shook the world? The one where the massive beast froze and sat down before him. The world had never seen anything like it. News headlines exploded. Royal Guard faces a rhino and doesn't flinch.
Human vs. beast. A showdown for the ages. Bravery or madness? What really happened? The secret behind the Royal Guard's unbreakable discipline. A moment that stunned London. The video racked up millions of views. Journalists dissected every frame. Military analysts debated how it was possible to remain still in the face of such danger. Psychologists theorized about the mental training required to suppress instinctual fear. Zoologists speculated on why the rhino stopped. The internet exploded with debates. Is he even human? How do you stay that calm? I rewatched this 10 times. He doesn't even blink. This guy literally won a staring contest with a rhino. How? The rhino probably thought, okay, man, you win. This is the greatest moment in the history of the Royal Guard. The story dominated TV screens. News anchors, morning talk shows, analysts, everyone wanted answers. To some, this was a display of unshakable discipline. To others, this was a symbolic battle between human willpower and untamed nature. And to some, it was pure insanity. But everyone agreed on one thing. Nobody saw this coming. Reporters bombarded Buckingham Palace with questions. Major news outlets demanded statements. For hours, journalists camped outside the royal gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the guard, hoping that he might finally explain what had gone through his mind when a 5-ton force of nature charged straight at him. But he never said a word. He gave no interviews. He didn't acknowledge the global sensation. He didn't react to his sudden worldwide fame. The guard who didn't flinch, who stood his ground when chaos consumed everything around him, who didn't run, didn't defend himself, didn't surrender, remained exactly as he was, at his post, motionless, fearless, just as he had been on the day the rhino charged, and he didn't even blink.